Hello friends, I am Rob, and this is my State of the Dungeon address for the game that took place on June 27th, 2019. The game was 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and it is getting close to the end of the Princes of the Apocalypse storyline. The group was preparing for their final assault on the water cult to destroy the Prophet of Water, close the water portal, and move towards permanently ending the menace of the elemental cults in their world, which we are playing in the world of Greyhawk on Orth. So, the group made their preparations. They were already in the water temple, so they just had to go down to the Fane of the Eye, find the way down into the water node, challenge Gar Shatterkeel, the Prophet of Elemental Water, who had prior TPK'd one iteration of the group. So, he was pretty tough and they knew it. It was going to be a good challenge. And he was down in the node where his center of power was. So, basically they did just that. They were already in a good position to make their progress down. They found out that the temple had basically been emptied. There were no challenges for them, especially since they popped up in the middle of the dungeon on their dragon transport. But they went into the temple proper, and they found out that when they purified the altar with the help of the servant of Moradin, the water was flowing cleanly through the temple again. It had gone back to its old ways badly. The water itself reeked of corruption. It was tarnished, and it was bad news all the way around. And they knew that they had to, do something about it, which they already knew. So they went through into the back chambers of the temple, and as they were leaving the temple area proper, they found a ward was there, a magical barrier. At first, it resisted the spells. They shot it with a ray of frost, and it deflected that. Then they tried to dispel it. That was Antaeus who attempted a dispelling, and that caused the entire thing to flare, but it didn't break it. This thing was made by a powerful force. More so than he was able to dispel. So then Auric took out Ruin and tried slicing at it. Nothing. Could not find a purchase on it. Which, Ruin is almost the perfect weapon for destroying things, but magical barriers it doesn't like. So then they had the inspired idea to pull out the elemental weapons that they had claimed. They pulled out Wind Vein and Tinder Strike. And they used Tinder Strike first, and Tinder Strike was able to do a decent amount of damage to the barrier and damage it more than it was able to rebuild. This was actually a really good idea they had. And then Wind Vein, with the two weapons, they basically cleared the portal out, or cleared the barrier out of the way enough that they could get through it. The barrier was slowly reforming, but they had the key. Then they went to these stairs going down, and there was a powerful rune of antipathy that had been built there. That anybody who failed their saving throw would not be able to get to the stairs. And for the most part, the group did well. When you've got a paladin standing around who's giving everybody a +5 to their rolls, it makes things a lot easier. Except for the wizard. His dice luck it's abysmal. So he rolls a 1, he screams, soils himself, and runs out of the room. Eventually, the group, again, employing Ruin, destroys the step on which the rune was emplaced, and that caused the rune to fail. And the compulsion on Brock was dispelled, so he was able to come back and come back to the others. So, after that fun, the group had gotten past the hastily erected barriers to stop anybody from coming down. So they went down to the Fane of the Eye. where they had been before. Not much had changed. Nothing was there to challenge them at this point, except the area was starting to submerge. There was so much water that was coming through the river that was running at this point into the cavern that it was causing the caverns to flood. So they heard sounds of cultists from the water cult, or from the air cult and the fire cult, who were all scrambling to get out of the caverns. The earth cult is gone. There's nothing left of the earth cult. They destroyed the portal. All Link is gone. There's nobody left. But they did not close the portal, so the influences of Yancy Bin, Prince of Air, and Imix, the Prince of Fire, are... I think Imix is Princess of Fire. But anyhow, is still being felt. So their monsters are still kind of in the area trying to keep their nodes protected. So now they're clearing out because this cavern is about to become, submerged if things don't change. The group found the way to get down into the Plunging Torrents, which is the name of the water node. It basically involved going down what was at one point just a waterfall going down, but now the cylindrical chamber which the water would pour down was starting to fill. So they cast water breathing upon themselves, which is a brilliant idea. Definitely a good one. And they went down, for the most part swimming down, although the current pushed them plenty well. They got down into the Plunging Torrents itself. Again, the cavern was starting to fill, and when they looked around, there were some boats and a big watery sphere just kind of hanging down. So they grabbed boats, or a boat. They all got onto one long-keeled boat, and basically they followed the channel. They avoided any side channels. They were going straight on this time. Again, they do this, but in this case it was fine, because many of the challenges, if they weren't of the water cult, they had drowned, and a lot of the challenges in the side corridors really weren't going to come out and make them pay for bypassing them. So basically, the way this dungeon was set up is the boats are kind of like gondolas. It's kind of like going through the water channels of Venice. There's not a lot of dry ground around. You're going to be constantly going through and dealing with watery menaces. Well, the watery menaces were mostly bypassed. They got to a chamber that had a pair of Dark Tide Knights. These are humans who've been gifted by Olhydra to be bonded with a water elemental steed. In this case, a minor water elemental steed called a Water Weird. Water weirds used to be nasty. They used to, hang around in wells and fountains, and party would come up and they would jump on them and try to drown them. Now these guys are minor water elementals. Not very smart, certainly. Generally bent on evil and destruction, as any of the servants of Olhydra would be. But they are bound to serve these knights as their steeds. So when they came through, they were in a boat. They really couldn't be all that quiet about it. So the knights saw them. They saw the knights. Short combat ensued. The knights tried to stop them. Realistically, they didn't have much of a chance. The group is just too powerful. And honestly, a bevy of hold person spells basically spell the end of it. One water elemental, sadly, tried to get its held rider. It kind of grabbed him and took off towards the boat, hoping that he was going to do something, and ended up smashing him into the boat, which was funny. I was amused by that. And then the water elemental, when it realized that its bond was broken because its master had died on the impact, it got mad, turned around, and started trying to fight them, but they got swept out of the cavern too quickly. The other one got launched. Was it Oriana who did it? But he got held and then literally thrown into the side of the wall and sunk down. He could breathe water, so he wasn't going to drown, but he was pretty much out of the fight. So the group then just kept going and washed into the main chamber, the water portal room, where they got the opportunity to see Gar give out one last appeal, raise his trident, and say, "I summon you!" And this came through. Ladies and gentlemen, Ol Hydra, princess of evil elemental water. This design of this is kind of cool. It's got elements of kind of Cthulhu. If you look at her face, she's kind of got this kind of an octopus-like look. She has a chest. She has feminine proportions to demonstrate she is the princess of water. All the tentacles and everything, those are all tendrils of water because she has the ability to whisk out and grab people. And if you look inside the body, there are people inside of her. Because one of her abilities is, well, she's made out of living evil water, so she can engulf people. Wasn't as much of a danger to the group with their water-breathing spells, but that still wouldn't have meant they would have had a good time with it. So Ol Hydra comes through. Oh my gosh, this is a incredibly powerful being. What does the group do? If you said charge, you'd be right. The group immediately starts going over their tacticals on how they're going to fight her. I gave them a chance. I had the two spellcasters roll, and they both made the roll, and I told them, you are fully aware that no matter what magics you've got almost nothing that can do any significant damage to her. Your best spells are not going to cut it against her. She does not have any vulnerabilities to anything you have. She's got a massive amount of vitality. She is here in her node. There's not much that you can do in this. Okay, they're okay with this. All right, sure. So they let the boat continue moving on. They prepare to, start doing all their stuff. Well, the Hydra is mistress of water. When her swimming movement, she can go almost anywhere in the cavern in a moment. She just whisked up by the boat. Now, one of the things of the elemental weapons is that they're willful. They are proud, arrogant. They have the spark of the princes of the elemental evils with them. So, Oric's been having a problem with Windvane. Every time he pulls it out to use it, Windvane wants to be used. Windvane is vain and thinks that it is the best weapon. Quite honestly, it is one of the best weapons he's got, but he doesn't like to use it because it's evil. And the group has a problem with evil weapons, as most groups do. So, what does he do? He gets it out, he uses it, and he wants to put it back. But it's a wrestle. He has to make a wisdom check to put it back and to not be holding it. And he keeps failing because his wisdom isn't very good. So, in this battle, he started out with Windvane in hand because he couldn't put it away after using it in the against the barrier. So Ol Hydra looks at that and goes, "Oh, that's pretty. I want that." So she goes over, and she immediately has the water around their boat reach up and try pulling them off. They had tied themselves to each other to prevent them from being swept away. So they were all connected. And she starts pulling them off. The weaker ones get swept off the boat because they just simply don't have the strength to resist. That would be Oriana, that would be Brock, that would be Geth. So their sorcerer, the wizard, and their monk gets swept off without challenge. The warlock manages to make it. The paladin manages to make it. He's a brick. Auric had already been, he was over in the water already. So there were 4 of them in the water, and he's in the water with Ol Hydra. So Auric is kind of in a bad way. So she tries to grab the spear from him. She doesn't even bother to kill him. She just wants the spear at the moment. And because even though she's heard about what these humans have done, she's really not worried about them. So her primary thing is, I want that. So she tries to grab it, and the first time I think I rolled a 1 or a 2. He managed to keep control for a round, which was okay. She snatched it from him in the second round, though. Then There was... They all threw their stuff at her. They tried hitting her. They did a bit of damage. Let's see. A little bit of damage here and there. They tried casting their spells. It did a little bit of damage. She made her saving throw. All in all, they did about 20 points of damage. Nothing serious. And... yeah, not significant amount. So... the monk, Oriana, she's thinking to herself, what am I going to do? Am I going to go up and start trying to punch her? That's kind of what I do. And my water whip is probably not going to be all that effective against her. That's my other offensive thing. And I can't obviously hold purse in her. So she took a moment of reflection and prayed for some sign on what she should do. And she rolled. I had her do a wisdom test, and she rolled, and I brought her over the side, and I'm like, okay, you are visited by the spirit of Alona. And Alona, the nature spirit, she's very wise, she's caring for all, and she says, you can't win, but there are alternatives to fighting. Which is one of my favorite quotes from Star Wars, Episode 4. And she didn't get the reference, but that's fine. And so she's like, oh, crap, we can't fight her. We shouldn't fight her. So she went over and she told Antaeus, the paladin, she's like, we gotta get out, or talk to your god. We should get out of here. And Antaeus is like, oh, I hit her for a little damage. And she doesn't look like she's all that bothered. Or maybe it was... I think it was Donla, the warlock, hitting her with Eldritch Blast, which she just shrugged off. Like they were nothing. So he's like, okay, I'm going to plant my sword on the boat prow and I'm going to pray. Well, okay, he didn't roll as well as Oriana, but it was enough. And Hieronius basically, in whispers, said, look, idiot, you can't win. You die, you lose everything. A good general knows when it's time to pull back and save his troops. Because they die, the elemental weapons go to Hydra, bad stuff happens. So he's like, okay, we gotta get out of here. They start backing off. This revelation really, though, unfortunately for them, comes about when they get flushed out of the cavern. Donla didn't bring out Tinderstrike, so she had a hard time sensing it. It was in an extra-dimensional space. So she was happy with the spear for the time being because she wanted to add it to her power. She was already supreme here, but she wanted to, now she has control over air, too, with the spear. So she flushed them out. She put up a wall of ice in the corridor so she could do that, and then she figured she'd get back and finish them off. Well, they start hacking at the wall of ice trying to get back in there at her. And when she realizes the wall is being chipped away, because she can sense it, it's ice, it's water, she just starts going, she goes to the portal, she starts summoning some allies. Which includes her Storm Giant General. It includes larger water elementals than any they'd seen before. And I just went through and I'm like, okay, imagine all of my elementals here are actually water elementals. And I just started putting elementals down until they finally got the point they couldn't beat her. She had way too much stuff, and they were not ready to fight her. Finally, I think it took about 10 elementals and the Storm Giant before they got the clue. And Antaeus, did his prayer, and they were told, get out. You can't win this. So they're like, okay, we're going to leave. Now all the water was rushing out of the water portal, and so the tides were reversed. It wasn't all flowing in, it was flowing out. So they got basically pushed out the same way they came in. And they swam up the channel, and the cavern of the Fane of the Eye was almost completely flooded now. So they got up the stairs and got back to the water temple, and when they got back to their ride, their mechanical dragon, there was somebody waiting for them. He's a bald archmage. Mordenkainen. Yes, Mordenkainen himself was there, and he's like, so, things haven't gone so well, huh? And they're like, no. Who are you? I'm Mordenkainen. Get in. Okay. So they got in, Mordenkainen stepped in, and they took off. Mordenkainen mentally took control of the craft, and they got out. So Mordenkainen kind of told them the situation as he knew it. He was aware that a great disturbance happened. As he does, he kind of appeared to try to fix the situation. He assessed that Old Hydra was even out of his ability to fight. Even with the group and him, they could not stop Old Hydra at this juncture. She had fully entered into the world. Also, because of an ancient compact, the gods were kicked out of the world and unable to interfere except by proxies. They're clerics and paladins, etc. With Old Hydra. Up till this point, until she could get into the world, they could still do a lot, but now they were limited to just advice and granting powers and stuff. So he's like, okay, we need to get all of our resources together. I have more resources than you, and we will employ them to try to stop Old Hydra's forces, but we've got some issues. First of all, she's got a lot of power because of her node. She's able to employ all of her abilities. She can see through water anywhere around her. She can summon allies and elementals up. It doesn't take her much to have an unstoppable army. So what we need to do is I'm going to summon my allies, including the Circle of Eight, a group of powerful wizards. You've heard of some of them. We are going to make a stand, and we are going to try to cut off her power as best we can. We know that she's also drawing power from the other elemental portals. So we're going to need to close those. And they're like, we lost Windvane. Okay, well, we'll do what we can. So they're going to go and try to close the Temple of Fire. Along the way, Mordenkainen summoned allies, so they got to meet Otto for a brief amount of time. They got to meet the newest member of the Circle, Jalarzi Salivarian, unless the timeline has shifted. And at my point, it's when the Circle has been reformed, and Jalarzi is their contact inside of Greyhawk. And of course, her fat pseudo-dragon, Edwina. And Mordenkainen was busy trying to contact just about everybody he could who could be spared to come and help try to fight this. The group got to talk to him. They got to add input, suggestions, talk about the things that they had accomplished up to this point, and think about who could possibly come along to try to help. They weeded out some options. Some people they didn't think would be all that helpful. Like, they ruled out the Myconids because they thought that the Silver Dragon, who's their queen, is kind of rooted to that chamber, and maybe they just didn't want to see the Myconids get washed away. The princess in Hamlet has her army of veteran mercenaries, but how far that's going to go, they really weren't sure at this point if they can trust them or if they're even going to be a force for anything. So all in all these different alliances and things that they've drawn up really questionable about how much fruition they're going to come to. And ultimately, the group decided that they are going to strike at the fire portal if they can. Mordenkainen's ideas are that it's pretty likely that their defenses are going to be backed up by Old Hydra's forces. That they will try everything they can to make sure that the fire portal stays open. But at the same point, elementals aren't always the most observant beings, and that there's a possibility they might be able to get in almost up to the very portal itself and have a chance at trying to close it before Old Hydra can stop them. So to this end, he gave them a teleportation circle and an invisibility sphere. The teleportation circle brought them to Scarlet Moon Hall, which was a definable place that he knew of because he knew the location of the original fortress that was built upon it. Eventually it crumbled, and the fire cultists turned it into Scarlet Moon Hall, but it was still a site that he was able to lock onto. The invisibility sphere turns all of them invisible for up to 24 hours as long as they don't do anything offensive. So, They have Tinder Strike. They have a possible way of winning. It'll be interesting to see in the next leg of this if they can carry through, close the portal, and deny Old Hydra some of her power to bring her back to a level where she can possibly be defeated and driven out of the world. One of her tactics, which I neglected to mention, and I apologize for that, is the very first thing that she did when she came through the portal was she grabbed Gar and his magical trident and stuffed him inside of herself. So that in order to get at the Prophet and the spear and the trident that they need to close the portal, they have to get through Old Hydra to do it. She made it very clear that this was an endgame scenario. They had to beat her to close the portal, which they couldn't do. So, that was a tactic she used, and they're going to have to figure out, now that she has Windvane and Gar and his trident, how they can somehow get those separate so that they can have a chance of closing the remaining portals. If they can get the fire portal, they'll be a leg closer towards it, but then they'll have to deal with some uncomfortable realities of seeing how the rest of the world is going to be reacting to the arrival of Old Hydra. They've been told that on other worlds, about 90% of them get utterly crushed under the weight of the elemental prince that arrives. Does this mean that the others have a very slight chance of saving their world? Maybe. But we'll see what happens. So, this is my State of the Dungeon address. The group is in not panic mode, but they have a clear goal in front of them, and they know that it's urgent they complete it. So, we'll see what happens. Thank you for joining me, and I'll be with you next time here in my basement lair, the next time I crawl in front of the internet. Thank you, and farewell.